Hi, welcome back to Winter is Coming. It's been a minute, but this is my series where I go through A Song of Ice and Fire character by character and recap their recent past in the series and where they may go in the near future in preparation for the upcoming question mark book The Winds of Winter, as it has been about 14 years since the last installment and people could generally use a recap. Today, I'm doing a first for this series, and I'm doing a triple feature. Before, I've done one character at a time in this series, but I think these three characters all share enough similarities, and I think I would have about as much to say about them collectively as I do about individual characters before, as they don't have that many chapters as compared to the characters I have covered in the series so far. That being the three remaining viewpoints that hail from House Greyjoy that I've not covered in this series. Theon got his own episode, which makes sense. He was a viewpoint character back in A Clash of Kings, and in A Dance with Dragons, he has as many chapters as almost the entire rest of his family combined up until that point. So the rest of his family is our topic for today, that being Asha Greyjoy, his sister, and his uncles Aeron and Victarion Greyjoy. Part of why I'm so comfortable using these three characters in this one video is their common point of origin. All three of them were intended to feature in the Mega Prologue, which I covered in depth a couple weeks ago. This was a single chapter that was also 12 chapters that was initially going to begin A Feast for Crows, the fourth tome in A Song of Ice and Fire. However, Martin eventually found this was too big to be workable, and these chapters were broken off into being actual viewpoints, and we see them just appear throughout the series, and it expands beyond the bounds of the original Mega Prologue, as all of these characters end up having chapters in the next book, A Dance with Dragons or The Winds of Winter, as Aeron doesn't have any in Dance, but we'll get to that in a second. All three of these characters are essentially brought into our story to serve as our perspectives on one singular event, the Kingsmoot, the Ironborn selecting their new leader after the death of King Balon Greyjoy. The first four Ironborn chapters in A Feast for Crows all deal with this singular event. The first of these deals with Aeron's perspective, learning that his brother is dead, and trying to figure out what to do from there. His proposed choice for king, Victarion Greyjoy, does not have a clean way to become the ruling monarch, as the rules of succession would dictate that it either goes to Euron, who is Balon's next oldest brother, he is older than Victarion, or Asha, who is an heir of Balon, who Balon specifically said he wanted to succeed him. So Aeron has the bright idea to call this Kingsmoot, which is effectively an election where any man with a ship can stake a claim to the Seastone chair. The next three chapters deal with the lead up to that event and the event itself. We get Asha and Victarion both as perspective characters before the Kingsmoot, seeing kind of in their heads what they're thinking, what their pitch is, and then we get Aeron for the event itself. These two, Asha and Victarion, both A names, both confusing. Asha and Victarion serve as two different kind of answers to the Ironborn lifestyle. Specifically, Asha wants to kind of reform things, go back to kind of more the normality that Balon was kind of keeping between his wars, and see if they could make a life without kind of raiding as much or seeking open warfare and rebellion against the Seven Kingdoms. And Victarion just wants to stay the course, 1,000 points of light. He just wants to continue Balon's war and keep doing that because he really hasn't had an original thought in his life. We all know that Euron ends up winning the Kingsmoot, and all Ironborn chapters thereafter are essentially a response to that singular decision by their people. Victarion is the only one who has a chapter after the Kingsmoot in A Feast for Crows. It's called The Reaver. Fun fact, it was initially called The King's Brother, which I think is honestly a better title than The Reaver. But regardless of that, Victarion is essentially tasked by Euron in this chapter to sail to Meereen and retrieve Daenerys Targaryen. Euron wants to marry Daenerys mostly because of her dragons, and he's really into magic and all of this stuff. And Victarion hatches the genius plan to marry her himself, which I'm sure she'll be very into. But regardless, he departs, and then we pick back up with him in A Dance with Dragons, where he has two chapters, The Iron Suitor and Victarion 1. We see Victarion reclaim his name between those two chapters, which is a big deal as he is kind of coming into this sense of self that he's finally earned. But the Iron Suitor is a hilarious chapter where he is essentially just frustrated and the ship is infested with monkeys and his hand hurts because he caught an axe with it and it's infected. But eventually a red priest shows up named Makoro who heals his hand and makes it magical, and they all continue their journey on to Daenerys throughout the rest of the book. And he's yet to reach there as of the end of A Dance with Dragons and even the beginning of The Winds of Winter. Also, as always with this series, be sure to let me know in the comments who you want to see me cover next. Also, there's a playlist with all of these videos, as your favorite character might already have been covered. And while you're down there, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Make sure you don't miss future videos. Asha's journey takes a much more surprising direction. We hear in A Feast for Crows that Euron has wed her to Eric Ironmaker, who was another claimant at the Kingsmoot, and he left her at the Iron Islands. But we find out in A Dance with Dragons that she actually fled the Iron Islands for the north. She's holed up at Deepwood Motte with a number of other Ironborn, and she is attacked by King Stannis Baratheon. Once the one true king leaves the wall, Asha essentially becomes our eyes on him for the duration of his march northward. It's pretty clever on Martin's behalf because, like, he would pretty much drop off the map otherwise, and we do really want to have eyes on Stannis. He is a really interesting character and doing a lot of interesting things right now. So Asha essentially being his captive throughout this entire march is a really cool way to view things, especially as we've come from Jon, who's very much viewed as not quite an equal to Stannis, but he very much took Jon's advice. Asha's marches through the snow are pretty bleak, and we see a number of ill omens befall Stannis and his camp before they eventually are snowed into the Crofters village, which is this very small little outpost near Winterfell, where they're about to be descended upon by the Freys and Manderleys very early on in the Winds of Winter. But we do have some information on that in the Winds of Winter. So, looking forward into the Winds of Winter, these Ironborn are really, really weird. We essentially have 1.55 sample chapters for these three characters collectively. We have The Forsaken, which is an excellent chapter from Aaron Damphair's perspective. It's one of my favorites in the entire series, and we'll get into analyzing that in a second. But we also have half of a Victorian sample chapter that Martin read once at a convention. There's a video of it. I'd highly recommend you watch it. It's very good. I like listening to him read. I feel like he's just tucked me into bed, and it's very nice. And we also have the Asha fragment. So George R. R. Martin also appeared on an episode of Last Week Tonight, and I think 2015, where you can see he's working at his computer, and we have a little bit of an Asha chapter there at the beginning of the Battle of Ice. So we have effectively half a page of that, half a Victorian sample chapter, and all of an Aaron sample chapter. The Forsaken catches us up with Aaron Damphair, as we know that he was initially intended to be in A Dance with Dragons, but Martin ended up kicking his chapter on down to Winds late in the development of that book. So it's a sample chapter, it could very much be changed, but it is pretty close to finalized as it was intended for a nearly published version of A Dance with Dragons. In this chapter, we find Aaron captured by his brother Euron, hauled from island to island in the bowels of his ship, the Silence. Throughout this passage, we see Aaron forced to endure his brother's torture, reliving trauma from their past, and being subjected to essentially being forced fed this hallucinogenic substance known as Shade of the Evening, where he has all of these visions of his brother Euron as this eldritch tyrant claiming the entirety of the Seven Kingdoms for himself. It's a very dark chapter, and it's really what made me take Euron seriously as a villain, as up until that point, a lot of what Euron has done could be seen as, to some degree, bluster and just not really knowing what he's saying. But overall, this chapter really cements him as a fairly magical threat and does make it clear that there are some very bad things coming for just this part of Westeros in Winds. With that said, Aaron does end the chapter tied to the prow of the Silence, seemingly about to be blood sacrificed, so we'll see how that goes. Continuing on with Aaron Damphair for a second, because I do want to just get through his section of wins, I think that he is set up to die in his next chapter pretty clearly, as he is about to be blood sacrificed, as I mentioned, but Martin does love a good fake-out death. I could see this kind of resembling Davos's supposed death at the Blackwater, with him maybe just supposedly being sacrificed, but maybe popping up later, but overall there are too many viewpoints in these books. I could see Martin very much pretending to kill Aaron off and then not having Aaron pop up until A Dream of Spring. That could very much make sense, because if he ends up separated from Euron, he really doesn't have a super important role in the overall narrative, and we need every chapter we can possibly get at this point. Victarion's sample chapter from the Winds of Winter is very much the final build-up to the Battle of Fire. We see him prepping the dragon horn that was given to him by Euron to be blown, which will supposedly bind one of Daenerys' dragons to his will, or maybe both of her dragons. It's unclear. But regardless, he has 3 people blow it, or at least set up to blow it, and then ends up getting weird and Gollum-y with it, according to certain fan reports of the second half of this chapter that we don't have a recording of, and then they continue sailing on to Slaver's Bay. Many people think Victarion is going to die in the Battle of Fire. He is a character who is very reckless and does do battle on the water in full plate armor, so him just kind of slipping and drowning is very much on the table, as is him blowing this dragon horn and then maybe having a dragon eat him or fly to Euron instead of him and just leaving him high and dry and able to be killed in the water. But I've said in the past, I don't think Victarion is dead in the Battle of Fire. I think that there's going to be a big death in the Battle of Fire for a viewpoint character. It's probably Barristan. And I think Victarion has a very interesting role to play going forward in Daenerys' camp. Specifically, we hear near the very end of A Dance with Dragons that her chief admiral, Grolio, has been murdered, which is a terrible tragedy, but it also directly opens up a position for Victarion to take in Daenerys' court, even if she refuses to marry him. I think that'd be a very interesting element for the character, as he could kind of fully rebel against his brother, as he is just kind of covertly rebelled at this point, and it could lead to a number of interesting explorations there. I just love to see him interact with Tyrion. I really hope that happens. While Asha doesn't have a full sample chapter for the Winds of Winter, and she does have the Asha fragment, we also catch back up with her a little bit in Theon's sample chapter. He's essentially chained to Stannis' wall at that point, and at some point later on in the chapter, Asha comes in to negotiate with the one true king. Specifically, she is a hostage, but she is kind of begging for her brother's, not life, but I guess for him to be executed in a more humane way. Specifically, she wants him to be given to the tree and not given to the flames. Stannis had previously planned on burning Theon alive for his crimes against the North, and it seems like Stannis has been convinced by Asha to instead behead him before the Heart Tree, as many Northerners tend to do, and that would very much bolster the resolve of his Northern forces. With that said, many think that he's going to be doing a fake out, essentially, killing Karstark instead of Theon. Both of them look like old men, and Theon is a very important hostage for a number of reasons. But we learn from the Asha fragment that Asha is in the middle of the Battle of Ice. She is going to be our kind of eye in the center of the action there, and it's unclear how exactly she is going to come through this. It sounds like Stannis' plan, based on the Night Lamp theory, which I'll link in the cards, is going to be to send his foes through the ice, but Asha being in the middle of this battle does make things pretty dangerous, as if people are falling through the ice, I think she could too. And also, it just overall seems like the plan might not be going fully to what it was initially intended, as there is word in the Asha fragment of forces rushing together, which doesn't sound like anything in the Night Lamp theory. I would also like to note that all three of these Greyjoy Ironborn viewpoints have a fairly sizable possibility of dying by drowning within their first two chapters of the Winds of Winter. Aeron could fall off his ship and drown, Victarion could slip in battle and drown in his plate armor, and Asha could fall through the ice at the Battle of Ice and drown as well. I think personally Martin should go for the hat trick just for the most funny outcome possible, but overall I think it's a pretty strong sizable chance that none of them die. I should also mention there's a distinct possibility that Asha is pregnant in the Winds of Winter. I'd say it's about a 50% chance. It's not a sure thing, but it is pretty concretely lampshaded in Dance as a possibility. In the Wayward Bride chapter, she ends up getting with Carl the Maid, this other Ironborn guy, and she very pointedly thinks about needing to brew moon tea or risking an unplanned pregnancy, and I think the quote is loosing another Kraken on the world. She is captured by Stannis pretty much immediately after this and does not have a chance to make moon tea, so there is at least somewhat distinct possibility that she could be pregnant via Carl the Maid and could end up furthering the Greyjoy line that way, which could do wonders to invalidate the Kingsmoot. I go back and forth on whether or not I think Asha is going to survive the Winds of Winter. Back when I started this channel, I was pretty sure she wouldn't. Then I switched to kind of being more sure that Theon wouldn't. I still think Theon is less likely to survive than Asha, because I think Asha has a much larger role to play in the continuance of the Iron Islands and the Greyjoy line as a whole. Specifically, given the fact that she is kind of this optimistic vision of the future, as she is someone who is trying to actively make changes to their ways of life that would benefit not only them, but the lands surrounding them, and she has learned, at least somewhat, or kind of not yet, that there is a way to invalidate the Kingsmoot, likely by way of Theon being presented as a latecomer, or Theon's potential bastard child who was given to the captain of the Miriam, given that his daughter and Theon had a prolonged affair early on in the Clash of Kings. So I think Asha has a political role to play left, and I don't think she's super likely to die, but I do think she is pretty likely to depart the North soon after the Battle of Ice, as Theon is pretty redundant to her as a hostage. And I think that if anyone is going to stay as our viewpoint on Stannis, it'll probably be Theon, as this Theon sample chapter does tend to indicate. These three Greyjoys are all characters that were initially supposed to not be viewpoints anymore after A Feast for Crows, but regardless of that initial intent, they have persisted. They all will have chapters in The Winds of Winter. How many? It's hard to say. Will they survive? It's hard to say. These are characters that are a lot harder to predict for because, given that they are not as central to the narrative, Martin has a lot more latitude to just do whatever he wants. If he has a version of the story that he wants to play out, and that version of the story would be enabled by killing one of these guys off, I think he's pretty likely to do it, unless there is some other thing that would be obstructing. It's unclear where these characters will go in The Winds of Winter, but I do think they are more likely than not to survive. I think if I had to rate their chances of survival, it would probably be Aeron least likely, Victarion middleist likely, and Asha most likely. But overall, I could be wrong. It would be a first, but I could be wrong. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. It does really help the channel, and it's free. So yeah, I'll have many more videos on A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, Duncan Egg in the very near future, and I very much look forward to being able to share all of those with you. Also, I have a Patreon. I keep forgetting to talk about that. It's linked in the description if you want early access to videos and access to a Discord server. So you sure can do that. That was a thing that helps support me. Yeah, I'm bad at plugging things, but I'm trying my best here, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon.